The great hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with fear and whispers of doom. Representatives from 100 worlds sat in their floating chairs, their alien faces twisted with worry. At the center of it all stood Commander Hana, her silver fur dulled with stress and her wolf-like ears pressed flat against her skull. She had brought news that would change everything. "The last defense grid is failing," Hana announced, her voice carrying across the vast chamber. "Without new quantum crystals, our shields will collapse in 7 days." She paused, letting the terrible truth sink in. "The Void Swarm will reach the core worlds within a week." A ripple of panic spread through the assembly. The Void Swarm had already consumed the outer rim systems, leaving nothing but dead rocks floating in space. These creatures were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They ate planets and turned them into massive hive complexes that spawned even more of their kind. Every military force sent against them had been destroyed completely. "What about the crystal cache on Kepler 442b?" asked Ambassador Quan, his blue tentacles waving nervously. Everyone knew the answer, but someone had to ask. Hana's expression grew even darker. "The planet fell to the swarm 6 months ago. 3 full battle fleets attempted to retrieve the crystals. None returned. The planet's surface is now covered with biomechanical structures that stretch from pole to pole. Nothing organic can survive there for more than a few minutes." The chamber erupted in dozens of alien languages as representatives argued and pleaded and cursed their fate. Some called for immediate evacuation of the core worlds. Others demanded they try another massive military assault. A few simply sat in stunned silence, knowing their species would not survive the coming darkness. In the maintenance section of the great station, far from the political chaos above, Tay continued his daily work. He was a human, which meant most aliens barely noticed him. Humans were the galaxy's fix-it people. They cleaned things and repaired things and somehow made broken technology work again. They were not warriors or politicians or heroes. They were just there, keeping the lights on and the air flowing. Tay had been listening to the emergency broadcast while he worked on a malfunctioning air recycler. The news was bad, but he had heard bad news before. The galaxy was always facing some crisis, or another. Usually someone figured out a solution. Sometimes they did not, and bad things happened. That was how life worked in space. What caught his attention was not the talk of doom and gloom. It was the technical details. A planet covered in biomechanical structures. Quantum crystals locked inside a hive complex. Organic matter being consumed and converted into something else. To the politicians and generals, these were obstacles that made their mission impossible. To Tay, they sounded like engineering problems that needed practical solutions. He finished his work on the air recycler and started walking toward the council chambers. Most humans were not allowed in the main assembly, but maintenance workers could go anywhere. After all, every part of the station needed to be kept running, even during the end of the world. Commander Hana was still speaking when Tai entered the back of the Great Hall. She had moved on to discussing which military units might be sacrificed in a final desperate attempt to reach the crystals. The conversation had turned to the Cubs, young Zalorian soldiers who had just finished their basic training. "The Cubs are inexperienced but expendable," General Yoon was saying, his reptilian features showing no emotion. "If we send them with minimal equipment, the swarm might not consider them a major threat. Perhaps a few could slip through while the creatures are distracted." Several representatives objected loudly. The Cubs were children, barely past their first molt. Sending them on a suicide mission violated every treaty about the treatment of young soldiers. But with the entire galaxy facing extinction, such concerns seemed less important. "I volunteer to go with them," a clear voice said from the back of the chamber. Every head turned to look at the source of the voice. Tay stood calmly near the maintenance entrance, still wearing his work clothes and carrying a toolbox. The assembled aliens stared at him in confusion. Humans did not volunteer for military missions. They fixed things and stayed out of the way. When real fighting started, Commander Hana found her voice first. "Human, this is a restricted assembly. Return to your duties immediately." "The air recycling system in Section 7 needs attention," Tay said politely. But I heard you discussing the crystal retrieval mission. I would like to volunteer. The chamber fell silent. Even the constant hum of the station's systems seemed to pause. General Yoon's tail twitched with what might have been amusement. Human. Maintenance worker. This is a military operation. You have no combat training or relevant experience. I have 40 years of experience maintaining alien technology, Tay replied. I know how things work and how they break. From what I heard, this mission requires someone who can operate in hostile mechanical environments and solve practical problems under pressure. That describes most of my career. Before anyone could respond, two young voices spoke up from the military section. We will go with the human. Wu and Dal stepped forward from the group of cubs. They were young even by Xylorian standards, their silver fur still soft and their movements uncertain. Wu was taller and carried herself with more confidence. Dal was smaller and seemed nervous, but his eyes held determination. You do not understand what you are volunteering for, Hana said, her voice gentler now. This is not a training exercise. The swarm has destroyed entire armies. The survival rate for this mission is effectively 0. Then it does not matter if we are experienced or not, Dal said quietly. If everyone who goes dies anyway, perhaps it is better to send people who have not had time to become important yet. His logic was brutal but sound. The military commanders exchanged uncomfortable looks. They had been planning to send the cubs anyway, but hearing the young soldier volunteer made it feel different. More honest, perhaps, but also more terrible. Tay walked forward until he stood beside the two young Xylorians. Up close, he could see they were afraid but trying hard not to show it. Their hands shook slightly, and their ears kept turning toward every small sound. They were children pretending to be soldiers because their world was ending. If the Council approves this mission, Tay said, I request permission to prepare the equipment and plan the approach. I will need access to all available data about the target planet and the swarm installations. You cannot be serious, Ambassador Quan sputtered. You want to entrust the galaxy's last hope to a maintenance worker and 2 cubs. Our last hope, Hana corrected grimly. Every other option has been tried and failed. Perhaps it is time to consider approaches that the enemy has not encountered before. The debate that followed was heated and desperate. Some representatives argued that sending such an unlikely team was giving up completely. Others pointed out that conventional military thinking had accomplished nothing except getting people killed. In the end, the decision came down to a simple fact. They had no better ideas. The vote was close, but it passed. Tay and the 2 cubs would be given a small stealth ship and whatever equipment they requested. They would have 48 hours to prepare before the mission launched. After that, the galaxy would discover whether maintenance workers and children could accomplish what armies had failed to do. As the assembly broke up into smaller groups planning the logistics, Hana approached the unlikely volunteers. I want you to know that no one expects you to succeed, she said. This mission is being authorized because we are out of alternatives, not because anyone believes it will work. That is honest of you, Tay replied. Do you have detailed technical specifications for the swarm biomechanical structures? Why would you want those? Because everything breaks eventually, Tay said simply. Even alien nightmare machines. You just have to know where to push. As they walked away to begin their preparations, Hana watched them go with a mixture of admiration and heartbreak. She was sending children to die alongside a human janitor. The news feeds would call it the sacrifice run within hours. But something in the humans' calm confidence made her wonder if perhaps they were missing something important. Maybe the galaxy's salvation would come not from its greatest warriors, but from the people who kept things working when everything else fell apart. The stealth ship Whisper cut through space toward Kepler 442b, its hull designed to bend light and scatter sensor readings. Inside the cramped cockpit, Tay sat at controls that had been built for beings twice his size, his weathered hands moving across alien interfaces with practiced ease. Behind him, Wu and Dal pressed their faces to the observation ports, watching their destination grow larger. What they saw made both young Xylorians whimper softly. The planet that had once been green and blue now pulsed with veins of black organic machinery. Massive spires pierced the atmosphere like infected needles, breathing clouds of toxic vapor into space. The continents themselves seemed to writhe and shift, covered in structures that looked more grown than built. The reconnaissance data did not capture how extensive the changes are, Wu said, her voice barely above a whisper. The entire planetary surface has been converted. Tay nodded while adjusting their approach vector to avoid a drifting mass of debris. The wreckage of 3 battle fleets floated around the planet like a graveyard in space. Massive dreadnoughts had been torn apart and scattered across thousands of kilometers. Some of the ship fragments showed signs of partial biological conversion, their metal hulls sprouting organic growths that pulsed with sickly light. "Look at how they move," Dal observed, pointing to several pieces of wreckage that were slowly drifting toward the planet. "The debris is being collected. Resource recovery," Tay explained. "Even alien nightmare machines need raw materials. They are probably harvesting the metal and any useful technology from the destroyed ships." As they drew closer, the true scope of the swarm's work became clear. The biomechanical structures were not randomly placed. They formed patterns across continents connected by networks of organic conduits that carried glowing fluids and electrical impulses. What looked like chaos from a distance revealed itself to be a massive integrated system. "It is like a planetary nervous system," Wu said with growing horror. "The entire world has become a single organism." Their ship began to shudder as they entered the upper atmosphere. Warning lights flashed across the control panels as the bioelectromagnetic interference from the surface started disrupting their systems. Tay's hands moved quickly over the controls, manually overriding automated systems that were failing one by one. "Stealth systems are down," he reported calmly. "Navigation is unreliable. Communications are completely blocked. We are essentially flying blind now." A proximity alarm screamed as something large moved past them in the toxic clouds. Through the swirling vapors, they caught a glimpse of a flying creature the size of a building, its wings a fusion of organic tissue and mechanical components. It did not seem to notice their small ship, but the sight of it made Dal curl up in his seat. "How many of those things are there?" he asked. "Unknown," Tay replied. "But they appear to be patrol units. The good news is they seem focused on watching for large threats. A small maintenance ship might not trigger their attention." The landing was more of a controlled crash. Their engines failed completely as they descended through the lower atmosphere, and Tay had to use emergency thrusters to avoid hitting a cluster of organic towers. They skidded across a field of hardened biomatter before coming to rest against what looked like a fossilized tree made of metal and bone. The silence after they stopped was complete except for the settling sounds of their cooling ship. Through the hull, they could hear strange noises from outside, clicking, grinding, and a low humming that seemed to come from the ground itself. The external sensors showed movement everywhere, but nothing was approaching their crash site directly. "Atmosphere is toxic to most species," Tay read from his instruments. "High concentrations of sulfur compounds and organic acids. The biomechanical structures are releasing these as waste products, or as a defense mechanism," Wu suggested. "If the air itself is poisonous, most invaders would die before they could do any damage." Tay opened his equipment kit and began pulling out items that looked more suited for a cleaning supply closet than a military mission. Bottles of industrial chemicals, rolls of metallic tape, and several devices that resembled modified maintenance tools. He handed breathing masks to Wu and Dal, then started spraying himself with an oily liquid that smelled terrible. "Industrial degreaser mixed with synthetic pheromones," he explained. "I collected scent samples from 17 different alien species and combined them into this mixture. To most detection systems, I will smell like everything and nothing at the same time." The cubs watched in fascination as Tay continued his preparations. He attached small devices to their equipment that looked like sensor scrambles, then pulled out what appeared to be a janitor's cart, equipped with various cleaning supplies and tools. "We are going into the most dangerous place in the galaxy," Dal said slowly. And you brought a mop? Maintenance equipment opens doors that weapons cannot, Tay replied. Every complex system needs routine upkeep. Even alien nightmare machines have to clean their filters and clear their waste disposal systems. If we look like service workers instead of invaders, we might be ignored long enough to reach our objective. They stepped out of their damaged ship into the hellish landscape of the converted planet. The ground beneath their feet felt wrong, yielding slightly like living tissue but hard enough to walk on. Structures rose around them that defied easy description. Part machine, part organism, all nightmare. Cables that might have been veins or data conduits snaked between buildings that breathed and pulsed with internal rhythms. The air was thick with moisture and chemical vapors that made their eyes water despite the protective masks. Strange lights flickered in the distance, and they could hear the sound of massive machinery operating somewhere below ground. Most disturbing of all were the occasional glimpses of movement in their peripheral vision, creatures that scuttled away whenever they turned to look directly. The facility containing the quantum crystals is approximately 12 kilometers in that direction, Wu said, consulting her navigation device. But the terrain between here and there appears to be completely controlled by swarm structures. Tay pulled his cart behind him as they began walking toward their target. The wheels were designed to move smoothly over any surface, and he had modified them with sound dampeners to minimize noise. As they moved deeper into the biomechanical landscape, they began to encounter their first real challenges. Creatures emerged from hidden openings to investigate the intruders. These were smaller than the flying patrols they had seen, but no less threatening. They moved on multiple legs that ended in razor-sharp points, and their heads were clusters of sensory organs that could detect heat, motion, chemical traces, and electromagnetic fields. Any normal military unit would have been discovered immediately. But when the creatures approached Tay, something strange happened. Their sensory organs twitched and recoiled as if confused by what they were detecting. The synthetic pheromone mixture was working exactly as intended, overloading their detection systems with contradictory information. After a few moments of apparent confusion, the creatures lost interest and scuttled away to investigate other parts of their territory. They cannot identify us as threats, Dal whispered in amazement. More accurately, they cannot identify us as anything coherent, Tay corrected. Their senses are telling them we might be food, predators, allies, or inanimate objects all at the same time. When faced with that much conflicting data, most automated systems default to ignoring the source of confusion. As they traveled deeper into the hive complex, the true genius of Tai's approach became clear. While military forces had tried to fight their way through the swarm's defenses, he was simply walking past them by exploiting the gaps in their detection systems. Every security network, no matter how sophisticated, had blind spots designed to prevent false alarms from routine maintenance activities. The biomechanical structures around them grew larger and more complex as they approached the center of the hive. Some buildings reached several kilometers into the toxic sky, their surfaces crawling with smaller creatures that appeared to be performing maintenance tasks. Organic conduits carried glowing fluids between structures, and the air hummed with electromagnetic activity from countless alien systems. It is beautiful in a terrible way, Wu observed, staring up at a tower that spiraled into the clouds like a living DNA helix. They have created an entire technological ecosystem. And like any ecosystem, it has rules and patterns we can learn to exploit, Tay replied. The key is to understand how the system maintains itself, then find ways to disrupt those processes, without triggering defensive responses. They paused at the edge of what appeared to be a major transportation hub. Creatures of various sizes moved along designated pathways, carrying materials and information between different parts of the complex. The organization was remarkably efficient, with each creature following specific routes and protocols that minimized interference with others. We need to cross this area to reach the crystal facility, Dal said. But there are hundreds of those things moving around. How do we get through without being detected? Tay smiled and opened his cart to reveal several items that looked suspiciously like cleaning supplies. We do not try to avoid being detected, he said. We try to be detected as exactly the right kind of thing, He begged the maintenance disguise worked better than Wu and Dal could have imagined. As they pushed their cleaning cart through the biomechanical transportation hub, the swarm creatures barely gave them a second glance. Tay had equipped them with modified uniforms that incorporated scent dampeners and electromagnetic scramblers, making them appear to be routine service workers to any scanning systems. The deeper they went into the hive complex, the more disturbing their surroundings became. The walls were not just organic, they were neural. Clusters of brain tissue from dozens of different species had been woven together into processing networks that pulsed with electrical activity. These biological computers were analyzing everything that happened in the complex, learning from each encounter and adapting their responses. They are using harvested memories, Wu whispered, her voice tight with horror. Those neural clusters contain the minds of soldiers who tried to attack this place. Tay nodded grimly, while he pretended to clean a section of corridor wall. His modified sensor equipment was picking up electromagnetic patterns that confirmed Wu's observation. The swarm does not just kill its enemies, it absorbs their knowledge and experience. Every military tactic that has been used against them is now part of their defensive capabilities. Dal was staring at a particularly large neural cluster that dominated one wall of the passage they were traveling through. The tissue was arranged in patterns that resembled the insignia of the Galactic Defense Force. That section contains Admiral Chen's neural patterns, he said quietly. I recognize the arrangement from intelligence briefings. He was considered one of our greatest strategic minds. And now he is working for the enemy, Tay replied. Along with every other military leader who has tried to assault this place. The swarm has accumulated centuries of combat experience from the galaxy's best warriors. They continued deeper into the complex, following maintenance tunnels that ran parallel to the main corridors. Tay had quickly identified the service infrastructure that kept the massive hive functioning, and he was using that knowledge to navigate areas that were less heavily monitored. Every technological civilization, no matter how alien, needed basic systems for power distribution, waste management, and environmental control. How do you know so much about alien infrastructure? Wu asked, as they crawled through what appeared to be a ventilation shaft lined with organic filters. 40 years of maintenance work on stations and ships belonging to 200 different species. Tay replied. The details vary, but the principles are universal. Air has to move, waste has to be removed, and energy has to be distributed. Once you understand those basics, you can figure out how any system works. The shaft opened into a vast chamber that took their breath away. They were looking at the swarm's central command center, a cathedral-sized space filled with neural networks that stretched from floor to ceiling. The biological computers here were processing information from across the entire hive, coordinating the activities of millions of creatures and analyzing threats in real time. But what made the cubs gasp was the collection of memory cores arranged around the chamber's perimeter. Each core contained the complete neural patterns of a military leader who had been captured and processed by the swarm. Admirals, generals, tactical specialists, and strategic planners from every major species in the galaxy were represented here, their knowledge now serving their former enemies. This is how they have been winning, Dal said with growing understanding. They know every military doctrine, every standard formation, every conventional tactic that might be used against them. No traditional army could possibly surprise them. Tay was studying the chamber with professional interest rather than horror. While the cubs saw a collection of their heroes' minds enslaved by the enemy, he saw something else entirely. Look at how the information flows between the cores, he said. The neural networks are designed to share data instantaneously across the entire system. That makes them incredibly efficient, but it also creates a potential vulnerability. What do you mean? Wu asked. Any system that depends on instant communication between all its components can be disrupted if you introduce the right kind of interference, Tay explained. The more integrated the network, the more catastrophic the failure when something goes wrong in a critical node. They moved past the command center using service corridors that ran behind the main neural clusters. Tay had noticed that the swarm's biomechanical systems required constant maintenance just like any other technology. Organic components needed nutrients, mechanical parts needed lubrication, and electrical systems needed regular cleaning to prevent buildup of conductive particles. What was fascinating to observe was how the swarm had automated these maintenance processes. Specialized creatures moved through the infrastructure performing routine upkeep tasks, following programmed patterns that had been derived from the memories of captured engineers and technicians. The irony was not lost on Tay that his own professional knowledge might be stored in some of these neural networks. The quantum crystal storage facility should be directly ahead, Dal reported, checking his navigation equipment. But the sensor readings are showing massive defensive installations surrounding it. They crawled to an observation point that allowed them to see their target. The crystal facility was housed in a structure that defied easy description, part organic growth and part mechanical fortress. It was surrounded by the largest concentration of guardian creatures they had encountered, biomechanical horrors that incorporated the best features of predators from dozens of worlds. These guardians were the swarm's ultimate weapons, created using combat memories harvested from the galaxy's greatest warriors. They moved with the fluid grace of expert fighters, their adaptive armor shifting to counter different types of attacks, and their sensory organs scanning constantly for threats. Each guardian was effectively immortal as long as the hive's neural networks could download new tactics and strategies into their biological processors. Those things have the combined combat experience of every military unit that has ever attacked this place, Wu said, her voice barely above a whisper. How can 3 maintenance workers possibly get past them? Tay was quiet for several minutes, studying the Guardians' movement patterns and the structure of the facility itself. His maintenance training had taught him to look for the invisible, systems that kept complex installations running. And even this nightmarish fortress would need basic infrastructure support. We do not get past them, he said finally. We make them get past themselves. He opened his equipment cart and began assembling what looked like a standard maintenance toolkit. But as Wu and Dal watched more carefully, they realized he was preparing for something much more sophisticated than routine cleaning. Every tool had been modified, every chemical had been carefully selected, and every piece of equipment served a purpose in some larger plan. The Guardians are operating on combat algorithms derived from military memories, Tay explained as he worked. They know how to respond to every type of weapon, every tactical formation, and every assault strategy that has ever been used in galactic warfare. But they do not know how to respond to someone who is not fighting them. What do you mean? Dal asked. Military thinking focuses on achieving objectives through the application of force, Tay replied. Engineering thinking focuses on achieving objectives by making systems work differently than they were designed to work. The Guardians can counter any attack, but they cannot counter someone who is trying to help them. He finished his preparations and stood up, hefting what looked like a bucket of industrial cleaning solution. We are going to walk up to those Guardians and offer to perform routine maintenance on their equipment. Their programming will not know how to classify that as a threat, especially if we appear to be authorized service personnel. The plan was so audacious that it took both cubs a moment to process what he was suggesting. They were going to approach the galaxy's most dangerous creatures and ask if they needed their weapons cleaned. That is completely insane, Wu said. Yes, Tay agreed. Which is why it might work. Insanity is the one tactical approach that no military mind in the galaxy has ever tried against the swarm. They approached the facility openly, pushing their maintenance cart and carrying cleaning supplies. The Guardians detected them immediately, their sensors focusing on the small group with predatory intensity. But something strange happened when the creatures tried to classify the new arrivals as threats. The maintenance workers did not match any threat profile stored in the Guardians' neural networks. They were not carrying weapons, they were not moving in military formations, and their electromagnetic signatures indicated they were service personnel rather than combat units. Most importantly, they were approaching openly rather than attempting stealth or infiltration. After several tense moments, the Guardians apparently decided that routine maintenance personnel were not worth their attention. They returned to their patrol patterns while keeping passive sensors trained on the new arrivals, ready to respond instantly if the situation changed. Tay began what appeared to be standard maintenance work on the facility's external systems. He cleaned Sen. The quantum crystal vault stood before them like a monument to alien nightmares. The structure rose 30 meters into the toxic sky, its walls a fusion of organic tissue and mechanical components that pulsed with internal energy. Around its base, the guardian creatures moved in perfect formation, their biomechanical bodies incorporating the combat memories of the galaxy's greatest warriors. Tay continued his maintenance work with methodical precision, cleaning systems and performing routine adjustments while the guardians ignored him completely. His movements were so natural, so perfectly in character as a service worker, that even Wu and Dal began to relax slightly. They were infiltrating the most dangerous place in the galaxy by pretending to be janitors, and somehow it was working. The default entrance is sealed with both biological and mechanical locks, Wu observed quietly, studying the structure through her scanner. The security systems require authorization codes from multiple swarm command nodes, and there are backup defensive measures that activate if the primary systems detect any tampering. Traditional military thinking, Tay replied while spraying cleaning solution on what appeared to be a sensor cluster. Multiple redundant security layers designed to stop any possible attack. Very thorough and very predictable. Dal was watching. The guardian creatures patrol their assigned routes with mechanical precision. They move like they are following a program, rather than thinking for themselves. Even with all those military memories, they are still just following orders. Exactly, Tay said. Which means they will respond to situations according to their programming rather than adapting to unexpected circumstances. Military algorithms are designed for combat scenarios, not maintenance emergencies. He finished cleaning the sensor cluster and moved on to what looked like a waste disposal system. The biomechanical components of the hive complex generated enormous amounts of organic waste that had to be processed and recycled. Like every technological civilization, the swarm had developed efficient systems for dealing with this mundane but essential task. What made Tay smile was the realization that these waste management systems were directly connected to the facility's power grid and environmental controls. The swarm had created an integrated network where everything was connected to everything else, maximizing efficiency and coordination. It was an elegant design that would work perfectly under normal operating conditions. But Tay did not plan to let things operate normally. "I need both of you to help me with this next part," he said, opening his equipment cart to reveal several containers of different chemicals. "We are going to perform some routine maintenance on the facility's waste processing systems." The chemicals he selected looked harmless enough: industrial solvents, cleaning compounds, and what appeared to be standard degreasing agents. But Wu noticed that he was mixing them in specific proportions and adding components that definitely did not belong in any maintenance manual she had ever seen. "What are you making?" she asked. "A solution to our security problem," Tay replied. "Every complex system has points where small changes can create large effects. The waste processing network touches every part of this facility, including the vault security systems. If we introduce the right kind of disruption at exactly the right moment, we can create a cascade failure that will make their defenses work against them." He poured his chemical mixture into what appeared to be the main intake for the facility's waste processing system. The liquid disappeared into the organic conduits with a soft gurgling sound, beginning its journey through the complex network of tubes and processing chambers that kept the hive functioning. For several minutes, nothing seemed to happen. The guardian creatures continued their patrols. The facility's systems hummed with normal activity, and the vault remained as impregnable as ever. Dal began to wonder if the humans' plan had failed before it even started. Then the first alarm began to sound. It was a low organic wailing that seemed to come from the facility's walls themselves. The guardian creatures stopped their patrols and turned toward the source of the disturbance, their sensors scanning for threats. But their programming had no classification for the type of emergency they were detecting. The waste processing system was not being attacked, it was simply malfunctioning. The chemical mixture Tay had introduced was causing organic components to reject their normal nutrient supplies, while simultaneously creating blockages in the mechanical filtration systems. The biological computers that controlled these processes began generating error messages that cascaded through the facility's neural networks. "System failures in waste management are spreading to other infrastructure networks," Wu reported, watching her scanner with growing amazement. Power fluctuations, environmental control errors, and communication disruptions are appearing throughout the complex. More alarms joined the first, creating a symphony of mechanical distress that echoed across the hive. The guardian creatures were becoming agitated, their movement patterns showing signs of confusion as they received contradictory instructions from the central command systems. Their combat programming had no protocols for dealing with infrastructure failures that were not the result of enemy action. Tai was not finished. While the facility's systems struggled to cope with the waste processing crisis, he moved to the next phase of his plan. He began what appeared to be routine maintenance on the structural support systems, loosening critical joints and weakening load-bearing connections with surgical precision. Every building needs a skeleton to hold it up, he explained while working on what looked like a support beam made of organic and mechanical components. If you know which bones bear the most weight, you can make the whole structure unstable without causing immediate collapse. The facility was beginning to shake as internal systems failed in sequence. The biomechanical walls were convulsing as their nutrient supplies became contaminated, and sparks flew from electrical conduits that were overloading due to power distribution failures. The guardian creatures were receiving so many emergency alerts that their threat assessment systems were becoming overwhelmed. That was when Tay implemented the final element of his plan. "Dal, I need you to activate that emergency beacon," he said, pointing to a device that looked like standard safety equipment. "Set it to broadcast a maintenance completion signal." "What will that do?" Dal asked while adjusting the beacon's settings. "We'll tell the facility's automated systems that all routine maintenance has been completed successfully," Tay replied, "which means any problems that occur after this point must be the result of system design flaws rather than maintenance issues." The beacon activated, sending its signal through the facility's communication network. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The biomechanical systems that had been struggling to cope with cascading failures suddenly received confirmation that everything should be working perfectly. The contradiction between what their sensors were detecting and what their programming expected caused a crisis in the neural networks that controlled the facility. Safety protocols designed to protect the complex from damage began shutting down systems that appeared to be malfunctioning, but the shutdown procedures were based on the assumption that the problems were localized, not systemic. As each system went offline, it created additional strain on the remaining networks, accelerating the cascade of failures. The vault's security systems were among the first casualties. The biomechanical locks that sealed the crystal storage chamber required constant communication with the facility's central computers to maintain their authorization protocols. When those communication links failed, the security systems defaulted to their emergency configuration and opened the vault to allow maintenance access. "The entrance is unsealed," Wu reported with excitement and disbelief. "The security locks have disengaged completely." The guardian creatures were in chaos. Their programming was designed to respond to specific types of threats, but they had no protocols for dealing with a facility that was destroying itself through routine maintenance procedures. Some guardians were trying to repair damaged systems, others were searching for enemies that did not exist, and a few were simply standing motionless as they waited for instructions from command networks that were no longer functioning. Tay calmly packed up his equipment and began walking toward the now open vault entrance. "Sometimes the best way to defeat a perfect defense is to convince it to defeat itself," he said. "Every automated system has failure modes that can be triggered if you understand how it makes decisions." Inside the vault, the quantum crystals waited in their protective containment fields, glowing with the energy that could save the galaxy's remaining worlds. The storage chamber was smaller than expected, designed more like a bank vault than a warehouse. Dozens of crystal matrices hung suspended in energy fields that kept them stable and prevented them from interacting with normal matter. "How do we extract them safely?" Dal asked. "Those containment fields look like they would be lethal to organic matter." Tay was already setting up what appeared to be a portable maintenance station equipped with specialized tools. "Every containment system needs service protocols for routine inspection and replacement of components," he explained. "The trick is knowing the right maintenance codes to access those protocols without..." The facility collapsed behind them in a cascade of organic screams and mechanical failures, but Tay was already leading them toward what most people would consider a junkyard. The area was littered with debris from destroyed swarm bioships, their hulks scattered across the contaminated landscape, like the bones of ancient monsters. To Wu and Dal, it looked like a graveyard of impossible technology. To Tay, it looked like the galaxy's strangest parts depot. "We cannot possibly build a functional spacecraft from this wreckage," Wu protested, staring at the twisted remains of biomechanical vessels that bore no resemblance to any technology she understood. These ships were grown rather than built, and half of their components are organic matter that is already decomposing. Tay was examining a section of hull that seemed to be breathing, despite being separated from its original vessel. "The beauty of biomechanical technology is that it is designed to be self-repairing and adaptable," he said. "Even damaged components retain some of their original functionality. The challenge is figuring out how to convince them to work together in configurations they were never intended for." He began sorting through the debris with the systematic approach of someone who had spent decades making impossible repairs work. Every piece was evaluated for its potential utility, regardless of its original purpose or current condition. A damaged thruster assembly from one ship could provide propulsion. A section of neural network from another could serve as a navigation. Computer. The organic life support systems were still viable if you knew how to feed them properly. "This is insane," Dal said, watching the human attach biomechanical components to pieces of salvaged hull plating using what appeared to be industrial adhesive and determination. "Even if you could make these parts work together, the result would violate every principle of aerospace engineering. Human engineering has always been about making things work despite violating principles," Tay replied. "We build machines that should not fly, but they do. We create systems that should not function, but they keep running anyway. The secret is accepting that elegance is less important than effectiveness." The construction process was unlike anything the Cubs had ever witnessed. Instead of following blueprints or design specifications, Tay was creating a hybrid vehicle by connecting alien technologies in ways that defied logic. Biomechanical neural networks were interfaced with quantum crystal power cores. Organic propulsion systems were controlled by salvaged navigation computers. Life support equipment from 3 different species was integrated into a single environmental system. What made it even more remarkable was that the components seemed to be cooperating with each other, despite being from incompatible technological traditions. The biomechanical elements were adapting to interface with mechanical systems, while the quantum crystals were providing power in configurations they had never been designed to handle. "How are you making this work?" Wu asked, watching organic conduits grow connections to mechanical control systems. "These technologies should be rejecting each other completely." "I am not making them work together," Tay explained. "I am creating conditions where they want to work together. Biomechanical systems are designed to adapt and survive. If you present them with compatible resources and environmental pressures, they will modify themselves to take advantage of new opportunities." The ship that emerged from his efforts was a nightmare of mixed technologies that looked like it had been assembled by someone who had never seen a proper spacecraft. The hull was a patchwork of organic plating and mechanical components held together with structural adhesive and hope. The propulsion system combined biomechanical thrusters with quantum crystal power cores in a configuration that should have been impossible. The life support equipment drew from the environmental systems of multiple species and somehow provided breathable atmosphere for all of them. "It is the ugliest thing I have ever seen," Dal said with genuine admiration, "and I cannot believe it is actually functional." Testing the ship's systems revealed the true genius of Tay's approach. Every component had been selected not just for its individual capabilities, but for its ability to compensate for the limitations of other systems. When the navigation computer failed, the biomechanical neural networks took over guidance functions. When power fluctuations threatened to overload the quantum crystals, the organic systems absorbed the excess energy and converted it into useful work. "Human engineering philosophy," Tay said, as he made final adjustments to their improvised control systems. Everything breaks eventually, so you design systems that can keep working even when half their components have failed. This ship should not fly, but it will get us home because every part is helping every other part survive. The launch was an exercise in controlled chaos. Their hybrid vessel lurched into the air on columns of biomechanical thrust, its organic hull plates adjusting their configuration to improve aerodynamics as they climbed through the toxic atmosphere. The quantum crystals provided more power than the ship had been designed to handle, but the biomechanical systems adapted in real time to channel that energy into useful work. Behind them, the planet was dying. The cascade failures that had started with Tay's maintenance sabotage were spreading across continents as the integrated biomechanical networks carried contamination and system errors to every part of the swarm's infrastructure. Hive complexes were shutting down, guardian creatures were malfunctioning, and the neural networks that coordinated everything were fragmenting into isolated nodes that could no longer communicate effectively. The entire planetary system is collapsing, Wu reported, monitoring the chaos through their improvised sensor array. The swarm infrastructure is experiencing failures on every level simultaneously. Cascade effect, Tay explained. When you build a system where everything is connected to everything else, a failure in any critical component can bring down the entire network. The swarm created the most efficient infrastructure possible, but they made it too efficient. They eliminated all the redundancy and isolation barriers that might have contained the damage. Their ship cleared the atmosphere and began its journey toward the nearest inhabited system, traveling on a trajectory that should have been impossible for such a cobbled-together vehicle. But the biomechanical components were continuing to adapt and improve their performance, while the quantum crystals provided unlimited power for whatever modifications the organic systems decided to make. The first contact with the Galactic Council fleet came when they were still several hours from the rendezvous point. The military commanders were expecting either no contact at all or a brief transmission reporting mission failure. What they received instead was a cheerful maintenance report from Tay explaining that the quantum crystal retrieval had been completed successfully, and they were returning with enough power sources to supply the defense grids for several decades. The disbelief in Commander Hana's voice was obvious even through the static of long-range communications. Maintenance worker Tay, please confirm your status and current location. Our sensors are detecting an unidentified spacecraft on an intercept course with the fleet. Confirmed, Commander, Tay replied calmly. Quantum crystal retrieval mission completed successfully. We are returning with the requested materials plus some additional intelligence about swarm infrastructure vulnerabilities. Our current vessel is a temporary construction project that should be treated as experimental technology. The Council fleet was waiting for them when their improvised ship finally limped into the docking bay of the flagship. What emerged from the makeshift airlock was a sight that would be remembered throughout galactic history. Two young Xylorian cubs riding on the shoulders of a human maintenance worker, all three grinning with the satisfaction of a job well done. Commander. Hana stood in stunned silence as they presented cases full of quantum crystals, enough energy to power the galaxy's defenses for generations. Around them, alien dignitaries and military officers crowded forward to stare at the impossible ship that had somehow carried them home from a suicide mission. How? Was all Hana could manage to say. Everything breaks eventually, Tay replied, with a shrug. Even alien nightmare machines. You just have to understand how they work and know where to apply the right kind of pressure at exactly the right moment. The debriefing session lasted for hours as Tay explained his approach to the swarm infrastructure problem. The key insight was that the enemy had created a perfectly efficient system with no tolerance for maintenance errors or waste management failures. By introducing exactly the right kind of problems at exactly the right locations, he had convinced their own systems to destroy themselves. The implications were staggering. Across the galaxy, other swarm installations were beginning to experience similar cascade failures as contamination spread through their integrated networks. The perfect efficiency that had made them invincible was now making them incredibly vulnerable to properly applied maintenance sabotage. Within weeks, the Galactic Council established the Human Engineering Corps, recognizing that the galaxy's Survival might depend more on people who understood how things worked than on those who knew how to break them.